The problem with writing fiction is I'm constantly forgetting how to do it. Every time I sit down, I think it's easy to put sentences together, but it'll sound stilted, and I'll be distracted for days, during which time I'll have usually created some great mixtapes. And eventually, if I want to keep going, I have to step by step remember how it works, making notes and outlines that get more complicated until they turn into something. It's like when I used to shoplift food to eat back in 2010 when I had just moved into a closet in the East Village of New York and I didn't have food stamps yet. The secret is to trick yourself into believing you're not doing it. Just slip the bread in the bag like an accident, smile at the security guard, always buy something for real, something cheap to throw them off the scent. That's theft. This is a lie, but it's the same thing. It's like acting, finding a need to become a place within yourself. Like shoplifting, it takes familiarity, but not too much familiarity, or else you lose perspective and you get comfortable. Fiction, autofiction, or even nonfiction takes time and research, not because of a commitment to the truth, but to the lie. Of course, there has to be some idea of an essential truth, whether it's a series of facts or some Joseph Campbell bullshit about collective mythology. But if you're trying to write anything well, what you're doing is selectively choosing real or invented experiences, implicitly judging their artistic value, and then putting them out there even though the monetary value is nothing, at least in a void. If you're following me here, and if you take for granted my assumption that any kind of writing is lying, and lying is like stealing, I would go further and say outlining, drafting, or just working at writing is like scouting a place that you're going to steal from. Seeing where the blind spots are, out of the camera angle, out of sight of the employees. And needless to say, I'm only talking about stealing from a chain store. Even in your moment of greatest need, you only steal from a chain store. Jean Valjean would stick to Walgreens. But faceless places are still knowable. You come through a few times, you buy nothing, or steal nothing, and buy gum, and just get friendly with the place, and soak up the fluorescent light enough to get confident. The hardest thing about autofiction is writing just a few degrees away from real life as you experience it. Trying to lie about yourself is like stealing from your own home. You need to incapacitate yourself somehow to impose order on your life, to force yourself blindly to choose a path. Life being naturally just chaos, barely ordered by law enforcement, and the need to make enough money to live, along with whatever accumulated responsibilities or ideologies you've gotten yourself involved with. Incapacitate yourself and figure out what's worth taking. Hit yourself in the head, steadily dose yourself with acid, come up with some Oulipo constraint, join a cult, just write on a notes app pretending you're fucking around. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but even if you think you know exactly what about your life or any life needs to be written about, there's so many levels of assumption getting you there. Birth, love, a heartbreak, war, death, the dramatic, the plain, the erotic, the surreal, the everyday, the world itself, all of it will pass away. And is the artistic confidence that anyone's felt, no matter the outside incident, the interest, the confidence that it's worth documenting, is that even justifiable? If the text is mellifluous or illustrative, like an unfurling path through hidden trees, is it distracting from meaning? Probably at your peril. If words plainly communicate an idea, you might as well be in school or listening to a competitive debater. Either way, is a useful truth possible? There's so much writing already, so much great writing I'll never read. Should new art be illegal? Is it worth spending a life to make more of it? Since being a writer is truly a life sentence if you want to get it right. Of course, you have to communicate somehow, and if for any reason you find yourself believing anything, words are the most effective way to do it. Any kind of blind spots I have, my apologies. There may be no such thing as non-autobiographical fiction, but there's certainly no way to write about your own life without lying. Originally, I wanted to read a piece tonight about my great-great-great-great-grandfather, a Chinese man who, it is said, worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. My mom started taking Cantonese lessons again recently at the Pan-Asian Golden Bridge Plaza where she lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The last time she took lessons was in the 60s. In the old Washington, D.C. Chinatown, that's what you did. You sent your kids to Cantonese classes. Blocks and blocks of townhouses with restaurants on the bottom and Chinese church with a language school. And then a mall came and the city raised the whole block. And they moved to the suburbs, and language fell by the wayside. Now she's been sitting around at home in Michigan. Not because she's retired, she'll be working forever, even went back to school to become a nurse. But she doesn't have a social group, and her only child, me, left for New York as soon as he could. Since even growing up, Michigan winters and isolation have made me feel suicidal. And this past year, I've moved even further away, to LA. And my mom's family is back east still, in Maryland. And in that distance, she's not unlike our ancestor, her great-great-great-grandfather. Or me. While testing out her Cantonese, she started using old documents she'd found to practice translating, and discovered that our ancestor had fathered a child in Utah. She promised to show me more. So, I drove east from LA in March. I had to get out. In New York, I'd be out till 4 or 5 a.m. or more like 6, 7. The night out, never over until all possible darkness has been explored. Moving west had given me a phantom limb, missing the feeling of being in the center of everything, being constantly awake, walking out the door with no plan, back days later carried along by protests or readings or raves, still feeling like you're missing something, reaching some kind of symphonic social self-destruction because anything less seems like a waste of time. People notable or otherwise always out, everyone's brains slurry as the basis for the blurring of personalities, creating what? I don't know. So it's good to be here in LA, as defined by something like tiki, floating free from time. It's cool by essence, not desire. Desire being the thing that hampers New York, despite its power. Existence here is like a leap of faith, not endless hierarchy. But still, I feel uneasy. So the idea was to drive away and wind up at my parents in Michigan to see how they were for the first time since the pandemic, see what my mom had been working on. I stayed the first night at my friends in Las Vegas, whom I'd started a bookstore with, but after that was the vast Southwest. Not as punishing as the flatness of Nebraska, but still the longest drive you can make in America through the same territory. All those little variations in shrubbery and geolithic formations. And I slept in rest stops. I stopped in New Orleans for Mardi Gras, where I dropped acid and hung around with a friend from New York who'd followed in with restaurateurs, all of whom had their own 8-ball of cocaine. Never seen so much quantities, even in the darkest after hours in New York. The American energy of all-consuming debauch was everywhere, full of warmth and color and brazen appropriation without limit. Neighborhood after neighborhood of every kind of person or drug or drink, and parades, formal and informal, parties planned or impromptu, gatherings of gregarious drunks from every class and nation, locals showing off their houses or cars or grills, and music of all kinds, live or recorded. At Miss May's, the dive bar, I went on drunkenly about how the Midwest was nothing compared to this. I had spent the first 20 years of my life in endless gray strip malls and freezing, depressing cities, emptied of people, that other than the beer, Grand Rapids is worthless, and Chicago is the gutter of the United States. Everything just flows down to it. And then a line cook who had ordered everyone shots of Malort, which is the official liqueur of Chicago, got angry and said he was from Illinois. And what about food? Food comes from there, and we need farms, and they're beautiful, and they're necessary and good. And I said, it's all agribusiness. Who cares? And would you live back home? He didn't say anything, and there was a pause where everyone looked at their phones before he started shaking and threw a Corona bottle in my face. I wasn't even angry. I just kept saying to him that he had really succeeded, and it didn't make any sense to feel affection for the dull agribusiness Midwest. His great New Orleans life disproved it. He didn't say anything to that. He just smashed another bottle on the table again and again until his hand bled and until everyone gingerly got up and went home. And the next day, still a bit drunk and high and my face sore, I drove due north towards my parents' house in Michigan, thinking to myself how the body is not the text, how most of life is ignoring how awful the body feels, how no one wants to hear about the body in pain, vomiting on the side of the road, barely awake, even with Adderall and iced coffee propping me up. Halfway, I stopped at my ex-IRS Chinese-American uncle's palatial home in Ferguson, Missouri, where he lived with his black wife in a black neighborhood. He's gregarious and obese with a ponytail, proud to have done Michael Brown's mother's taxes, and he encouraged me to figure out my own 1090s over noodles and barbecue. After a mediocre night's sleep deep in his windowless and gaudy catacombs, I continued north to Michigan. Greeted by my mother and her 2 tired spaniels, I listened to her list off the ingredients for the various health shakes she'd been inventing. Ever since a bout with cancer, her already extreme predilection for hoarding food and analyzing nutrition facts had grown further. When she paused briefly, I asked her about the translating. She dodged it in the same way she dodges reading or admitting to anything that I write, by doing or talking about anything else. I went to Christian schools all my life because of my father's job as an astronomer at a Christian college, where he was now teaching. And there I'd learned that if you'd believed something, if you didn't believe something, if you felt something, if you didn't feel something, you just don't say anything. And then you'll avoid the pointless ways that religion tries to find arguments to drag you down forever. So I waited. She brought out local beers from Founders, The idea of it being bizarre at home where I'd never seen alcohol in my entire life. Did I seem like a drunk now? I didn't think I seemed wasted still. I could just be tired, right? As usual, instead of TV or music or radio or anything at all, we just sat in silence until the dogs barked and I drank. Finally, she told me there was nothing. She'd gone through all the letters and documents and there wasn't anything else. That there was the birth certificate for his son, my great-great-great-grandfather, born in Utah, but that was it. They existed, there was proof, but nothing for me to write about. Here was a man, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who had come from Guangdong province to California by 1866 and who must have returned to China at some point, for my grandparents should have immigrated here. Nothing else was known, and so everything was true. No lies produced by facts chosen, invented, or admitted, just life uncompromised and real. Thanks.